Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to first acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Wanisani, and Wendat peoples, and that this land is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. Washrooms are at the back of the entrance. Turn left and left again.
I was there that night on February 5th in 1981 at the Roman Baths on Bay Street when all hell broke loose. There was a tremendous racket. Then there was knocking on the door. Then the door got broken down. And then I got led away rather brusquely, still in my towel, to the front area of the bathhouse. It was very, very traumatizing. It was the first time I'd ever had an encounter with the police. So, I mean, it was really a very, very scary time. And I went home and didn't sleep that night and ended up in court. You know, compared to a lot of the other men who were out that night, I was open about my sexual identity. I was in a committed relationship. I had an understanding with my partner. I was accepted by my family and friends. And so I was able to get through the event. This was not the case for a lot of other men who were arrested that night. There were many men who were in heterosexual relationships, not disclosed to their partners, not disclosed where they worked. And for many of those men, they lost their relationships, they lost their jobs, and their lives were basically, you know, ruined. Their lives were destroyed by all of this. The night after the raid, 3,000 or more people gathered at the corners of Church and Wellesley in what is now the heart of the neighborhood in Toronto. The community basically demonstrated and told the police in no uncertain terms that they were not going to take that crap anymore. This apology isn't going to change anything unless it's followed up with meaningful dialogue. I don't think it has the power to erase what are very traumatic events from people's lives. But I do think it's perhaps a start.
Invite Randy Jackson to speak to Ron's involvement in and support for Indigenous health and social justice issues. Randy has known Ron since the first meeting of the Canadian Treatment Action Council in 1994.
These things are never easy, and with Ron, it cuts really, really deep for me. So friends, colleagues, family, as we gather here today to celebrate the life and legacy of Ron. For me, it's best to think about Ron as this giant in the HIV movement. He's a man who I know to have dedicated his life to building bridges and fostering understanding between Indigenous communities and the broader Canadian public. So my name's Randy Jackson, and I had the privilege of working with Ron on several important initiatives over the years, beginning with the Canadian Treatment Action Council, my work on the board of the Two-Spirit organization here in Toronto, and as a partner in research, and many of you will remember Charles Roy's study, Living and Serving, and we did a look-back study 10 years after that, and Ron was instrumental in making that happen. In every way, Ron supported the ideas of equity and justice, and even though he saw himself as not knowing all that much, he recognized that the inherent strengths of Indigenous peoples and was extremely important. And towards that end, he assisted where he could and helped us to address health disparities faced by Indigenous communities. Ron's passion for social justice and his unwavering commitment to finding innovative and inclusive solutions were evident from the very beginning. He didn't just talk he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. And through his own quiet authority, he often and frequently inspired us all to do the same. Throughout his career, Ron was instrumental in forging successful partnerships with Indigenous leaders and organizations, including CAN, the Two-Spirit people of the First Nation. His collaborative approach, his deep respect for Indigenous knowledges and traditions, and his ability to listen and learn from others is what set him apart as a true ally and advocate. Ron understood that true reconciliation required meaningful engagement, deep self-reflection, and learning about Indigenous values, and he worked tirelessly to promote understanding, respect, and shared goals. Ron's collaborative work with Indigenous communities supported Indigenous self-determination, cultural revitalization, and cultural well-being. His efforts helped to amplify Indigenous voices, highlight their expertise, and ensure that their priorities and perspectives were central to decision-making processes. And it's through knowing Ron that I've come to this understanding that those things really do embody what I believe to be very good virtues of allies when they come and work with Indigenous peoples. So Ron's impact was felt wide and across Turtle Island and beyond. And his legacy will continue to inspire future generations of change makers. His dedication again to collaboration, his humility, and his genuine care for others set a powerful example for all of us. Ron leaves behind this rich tapestry of accomplishments and a deep well of gratitude from the Indigenous communities whose lives he had touched. So it's an honor to be invited to speak here today. Thank you.
when he was chair of the AIDS Committee of Toronto, and she was co-chair of the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation. This began a friendship of 28 years, during which they co-founded and co-chaired the Canadian Treatment Action Council, a national group dedicated to advocating for access for treatments for people living with HIV. Louise?
Is that okay? Ron Rosenes was simply the most extraordinary person I've ever known. I feel privileged that he chose me to be one of his friends, confidants, and trusted colleagues for 28 years. As Rodney mentioned, we met in 1994 when he was the chair of the AIDS Committee of Toronto, and I was the co-chair of the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation. Ron was always open about his HIV status, even in the dark early days that he described of fear of people with HIV and LGBTQ plus people generally, and the vile stigma and discrimination that flows from these biases. Ron had values including a disdain for injustice wherever and however it occurred. He felt, along with many others, a responsibility to use the skills and the opportunities we knew we had been so fortunate to receive to help others. He was steadfast in his belief that the voices of people with HIV and those at risk of HIV should determine all laws, policies, and processes impacting them. He also integrated the voice of those whose health was impacted specifically by lack of social determinants of health. And he demanded a recognition of the need to deal with those issues to provide equity and equality for everyone with HIV. He was, as Randy has said, he was one of the HIV forerunners who understood that Indigenous people have their specific culture, other identities, and ways of knowing that must be respected. And as a result, they must lead all aspects of health, and in fact, all policies, with the OCAP principles as an underpinning of this work. He dived into every aspect of HIV work, from research, including a decade-long involvement with the Ontario treatment. I'm getting this wrong. Ontario HIV. Tell me. Thank you. Treatment Network. I don't know why I didn't get that one. He fought for rights of people with HIV to have a quality of access to needed services and the Ontario disability supports. Equal and equitable access to legal services through his work with the HIV/AIDS Legal Clinic and the Legal Network. And of course, treatment to needed HIV medications in a timely manner. That's where I saw Ron. And together, we co-founded and co-chaired the Canadian Treatment Action Council without too much stress for 15 years. I trust that the work that we did at CTAC, and especially Ron's work, fighting for clinical trials, compassionate access to drugs, and public and private reimbursement for HIV treatments, help as part of the work of the broader HIV community to give people hope, to save lives, and to provide the opportunity for a better quality of life for others. I know he was proud of the work he did there, among the lists of other accomplishments, which are legion, including support for Casey House and the development of HQ, a safe, integrated health hub to meet the needs holistically of cis guys into guys, two-spirit, trans, and non-binary people. I was always amazed how perfectly turned out Ron was for every occasion, and always was so polite, although very firm when it was required. I so admired his excitement about everything, and his curiosity, and his intellect, and his sense of humor. He was truly my role model and my hero. In other words, for 15 years, we were not colleagues, but had a profound friendship. I know that all of you in this room also felt that love, kindness, and consideration that Ron extended to everyone in his life. And Ryan, I know that Ron felt so fortunate to meet you in those last years. He much enjoyed the times that you shared and how much he appreciated everything he did for you. Whenever I had a problem I couldn't solve, I would think about it through an analysis of the lens that Ron would use, and that actually always helped me. I plan to continue to use that lens in the future. The day Ron went into the emergency for the last time, I texted him with some mundane question to which he immediately replied. And then he sent another text saying, "In other news, I am at the Emerge coughing up blood." I asked if he wanted me to come right away, but he said wait to see on what they've decided to do. I wrote back, "Life is so random and unfair." And then I said the last words to Ron Rosenes. But text, "I love you." That really says it all.
Thank you, Louise. Ron and Kate Rosenes first met in 2013 when he was chair of the National Coordinating Committee on HIV and Aging's Research Working Group, and she began providing secretariat support to the NCC as HIV and Aging Initiative's lead at the Canadian Working Group on HIV and Rehabilitation, now Realize. The two worked closely together on research, advocacy, and program development related to HIV and aging for the next decade, becoming dear friends in the process. Kate?
Hi everyone. I'm humbled to have been asked to speak today about Ron's contribution to improving care and well-being for aging and older people living with HIV. I'm here also sharing remarks on behalf of Dr. Sharon Walmsley, who's on call today and not able to be here. Hopefully she'll be joining us a little bit later. I first met Ron in 2013, and during the 10 years we worked together, I heard him begin countless presentations and interviews on HIV and aging with his trademark phrase, "I thought I was a survivor and a witness. Now it turns out I'm a pioneer." In his own words, he was a survivor as someone who had been living with HIV since the earliest days of the epidemic. He was a witness to the loss of so many members of the HIV community, but also observed the groundbreaking scientific advances that were made in a short period of time to manage and prevent HIV. And he was a pioneer as a member of the first cohort of people growing older with HIV. But Ron wasn't just a pioneer because of when he was diagnosed. He was also among the first in Canada to notice how his own needs and those of his peers were changing as he aged, and he was ready to make sure that the system changed too. Early in our relationship in 2013, he and I traveled to New York City, and we met with the folks at ACREA, the AIDS Community Research Initiative of America, to learn about what they were doing to build bridges between the HIV and aging communities. And when we got back, he co-led the development and facilitation of the earliest iteration of then Quigger's HIV and Aging course for service providers. He shared his own experience of growing older with countless audiences of service providers, peers, clinicians, researchers, and the public at large to put a face to the experience of aging with HIV, as he knew that to change practice, you needed to start with heart and then move forward with evidence. He helped organize a community meeting on healthcare consent and advanced care planning in the HIV community, and that went on to inform further projects. I could use the remainder of my allotted time here just listing all of Ron's contributions to advancing the field of HIV and aging, but I probably wouldn't even get to the end. And I know that everyone in this room is here not because Ron was a workhorse or even because he was keen to advance new ideas, but because of the person Ron was and the way that he worked. Ron was always in the know, keeping up to date on everything, forwarding more articles to me than I could read on a daily basis, and always approached what he read with a critical eye. One thing in particular in the field of HIV and aging that he stressed was the need to distinguish whether each aging-related comorbidity was in fact accentuated or accelerated in people aging with HIV. This was important to him because as a person with lived experience, he understood the psychological damage that could be done to community if researchers oversimplified their findings just to produce sound bites. It was through Ron that Sharon and I first met, and without him, the Panache Project, which is about to assess the needs of people living with HIV over the age of 60 across Canada, wouldn't have existed. He also brought people together through countless dinner parties who didn't know each other, but in the end felt like old friends. It was also important to Ron to keep sex on the radar in discussions of aging. He regularly provided gentle reminders to add it to the agenda of our workshops with long-term care staff and our research team meetings. He sent me links to HuffPost articles with titles like, "Meet the 80-year-old grandmother who's had sex with more than 1,000 younger men. I've been around the block." In fact, I would say that provocateur described Ron perfectly. In the subject line, he would write, "Dear guinea pig," when he wanted my opinion on his latest piece of work, and he would end his messages consistently with winky faces and prompts like, "Discuss." He had such a generosity of spirit and recognized the systemic reasons people weren't able to change, speak out, or act. So he tried to make change at the upstream level. One example of this was his involvement in developing the CIHR ethics guidance for developing partnerships with patients and researchers. He knew firsthand the value of engaging citizen researchers, but also the myriad systemic barriers to doing it, so he went straight to the source. Ron was the perfect liaison between the professionals and the community. As chair of the Community Advisory Board of the Change Study, he could carry on a conversation about biomarkers with clinician scientists and translate it into plain language. He raised ethical issues and challenged us to consider everyday things like, what is the appropriate length of a research visit? Ron was a mentor to me and a touchstone. Whenever I needed to hear it straight on HIV and aging, I turned to him. He was candid and he was real. He also cracked me up with quotes like, "I'll send a confirmation email shortly," or "at my present height," or "OMG, I just twuffed and it feels so good," which is a reference to a now defunct app used to pre-schedule Twitter messages for our World AIDS Day campaign. He was also a dear friend, a guest at my wedding, We talked about home, about love, about future plans, and we checked in on each other regularly. We continued to work together and these check-ins until the very end. We saw each other in person at Realize's 25th anniversary, just a week before his death, and I asked him if he'd be willing to collaborate on a new piece of work. He told me the same thing he's been telling me for a number of years. He was trying to cut down on his commitments, to enjoy his retirement, to travel more and spend more time with Brian. But he'd always help me if I needed it. I'm thinking he said that to all the girls and the boys too. On Wednesday, October 18th, he was gonna be a speaker at our HIV and Aging Symposium. He wasn't feeling well, but he'd try to make it online, he said. On Thursday, he texted from Emerge to say they were running some tests. In true Ron form, he first asked about how the symposium was going. On Friday, I checked in twice, but I didn't reach him. And within just a day, I was confronted with the news he was gone. I still have such an urge to text him, to open my email and see one of his jokes, or a picture of him and Brian all dressed up and out on the town. Brian told me that after Ron's death, Brian told me after Ron's death that when he went into hospital, he felt very at ease and well taken care of. And I can't help but think that it was because somewhere deep down he knew his decades of advocacy for good care had had a positive impact on the system, and that his forethought about his own plans and the way he wished to age well with HIV meant that he remained in control until the very end of his life. Rest well, Ron. You've paved the way for better aging with HIV for your peers, and I'll miss you immensely.
Craig McClure had a professional and personal connection to Ron for over 20 years. Today, he'll reflect on Ron's work with him at the International AIDS Society, and more specifically on Ron's work and engagement with communities and activists through international and regional AIDS conferences.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide a snapshot, just a snapshot of Ron's contribution at the international level, specifically through the international and regional AIDS conferences. Beginning in 2004, as the executive director of the International AIDS Society, I had the privilege to get to know Ron better during the planning of the 2006 International AIDS Conference in Toronto, AIDS 2006. Among many other talents, Ron seemed to have a Midas touch when it came to fundraising, locally, provincially, and federally. His warm and generous personality, coupled with a fierce refusal to take no for an answer, helped ensure that all the Canadian resources required were secured to host the largest health-related conference in the world, with over 30,000 people in attendance, including a fully funded global village that was open for free access to all the citizens of Toronto. Ron seemed to be at ease with anyone from every walk of life, including major donors, the pharmaceutical industry, government, researchers, clinicians, and of course, the community. As those of you who have, in this room, who've attended an international AIDS conference will know, there are always moments of great tension between these diverse stakeholders. The conference was and remains committed to encouraging and embracing activism. In advance of AIDS 2006, the IAS, as the custodian of the conference, developed in consultation with activists and the broader HIV community internationally, a detailed set of principles of participation, which aim to firmly commit the conference organizers to dialogue between all stakeholders and to supporting peaceful protest and demonstration during the days of the conference. As we moved from Toronto to the planning of Mexico City in 2008 and beyond, Ron was brought in to help broker that dialogue with activists during the conference, establishing a trusted relationship so we could plan support for protests as well as appropriate security to ensure that people and property were safe from injury and damage. I witnessed how Ron could diffuse tension, build trust, and ensure that activism was a vibrant and productive part of the week-long conference. I also remember how these exhausting conference days and nights always seemed to fall on Ron's birthday in July. He happily gave up celebrating his own birthday, working until midnight for 5 days straight with activist groups from around the world to make sure that their messages were heard loud and clear, and to ensure that no one was hurt. Some of what went down during those days was really beyond intense, but Ron fulfilled his role with his customary flair. Ron had another talent that proved invaluable in organizing another HIV conference that the IAS organized, the Regional Conference for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, held in Moscow in 2008 and 2009. He spoke Russian, of course. Was there anything this man could not do? Working with the Russian government may not have been as difficult then as it was now, but believe me, it wasn't easy. Despite having one of the largest injecting drug use related HIV epidemics in the world, the Russian government criminalized the import, distribution, and use of methadone and buprenorphine. And harm reduction were two very dirty words. That, coupled with state-sponsored discrimination against 2S LGBTQ+ people, made it very difficult to mount an effective HIV response in Russia and across the region. And a huge challenge to plan a conference that might contribute to fostering true dialogue. Communities from around Eastern Europe and Central Asia share a common, if not always first, language, Russian. Ron's fluency in the language helped tremendously, as the official government interpreters tended to say, well, they tended to, shall we say, skip over some of what people had to say. I personally leaned on him greatly to help me navigate what was really going on in planning meetings and in the corridors of the conference itself. Somehow, we managed to hold 2 conferences in Moscow that brought people living with HIV, key populations, scientists and government officials from around the region together for meaningful dialogue. And this could not have happened without Ron. Today, given the appalling situation in Russia, sadly, this could not happen at all. Ron touched hearts and minds through the AIDS conferences, just as he did through all his life's work. I'm grateful for his support and friendship, and the thousands of people who interacted with him during the conferences will also mourn his passing.
So now I'm going to ask Forte to come to the front. Forte Toronto Gay Men's Chorus is one of Canada's premier male choral ensembles with a diverse membership drawn from Toronto's LGBTQ+ community. Now in its 26th year, Forte has evolved through a wide range of performance styles, and today Forte's programming includes a meaningful exciting and challenging array of music presented in biannual concerts, their ongoing Unzipped Cabaret series, and numerous community events. The performers you're hearing today represent only a fraction of the choir's total active membership, which is nearly 100. With featured soloist Alain Paquette, accompanist Jeff McLean, and longtime artistic director Edward Connell, Forte will sing 2 selections for us today. First, from Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel, a song long associated with AIDS and quilts, You'll Never Walk Alone. And in their second piece, as a tribute to Ron's love of the works of Stephen Sondheim, the ensemble will sing Sunday, from Sunday in the Park with George. Douglas Elliott is a partner in the law firm of Cambridge LLP and a member of the boards of the LGBT Fund and the Canadian AIDS Society. Like Ron, Doug is a proud gay man, a longtime activist in the HIV/AIDS movement, and an advocate for Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ rights. He met Ron through those human rights struggles, and they have been friends for over 20 years.
Добрый день. Bon après-midi. Good afternoon. As a gay man myself, it's a great honor and a real pleasure to talk about the gay identity and gay rights activism of my dear friend Ron. I count myself lucky, very lucky, to have been his friend and to have shared in a small way in a life so well lived. Ron was a force of nature. There were many facets to the wonderful human being that was our beloved Ron, but his gay identity was one of the core elements. Out and proud is an understatement. He was a very important homosexual. And a very enthusiastic one. Ron loved being a man, and he loved men, unapologetically. Ron came to visit Greg and I in Elliott Lake, and to kiss my mezuzah. He was overjoyed and so proud, if a little surprised, at having found love again so late in life with tall, dark, and handsome Brian. He whispered to me, blissfully, I really think that he's the one. He was right. Ron was blessed with that sharp gay wit that gay men have admired ever since it was perfected by Oscar Wilde. And Ron was every bit as stylish and artistic as Oscar. In the best gay tradition, Ron's personal style was always to be meticulously well-groomed and sharply attired in understated elegance. He was warm, articulate, and intelligent, all qualities that would underpin his success as a gay rights activist. It may come as a surprise to those who knew Ron as a full-time activist later in life, but in my opinion, Ron was what I call an accidental activist. He did not set out to be an activist, but tragic events jolted him out of his happy life and drew him to activism. The roots of Ron's gay activism, as we saw on that video, can be traced back to that fateful night of February 5th, 1981, when Ron was one of the hundreds of victims of the notorious Toronto bathhouse raids. Strangely enough, Ron and I were both marching down the street the next night on February the 6th, but we didn't know each other back then. It was years later before we met. I was very young at the time. His activism was given an added push in a big way when his partner died of AIDS in 1991. That bereavement was the second great injustice in Ron's life, and he had had enough. He began volunteering at ACT, and it was just a few years later that we first met. I think it was after you met, but it's around that time. It's around the same time. And we quickly became fast friends. Ron's important contributions to the cause of 2S LGBTQI+ rights cannot be adequately described in a few minutes, and I promised I wouldn't be more than a few minutes, although I could be much longer, just like Ron. But I will highlight just 3 recent examples to illustrate his remarkable work. When I chaired EGAL's Just Society Committee, one of our report's demands was for the expungement of unjust convictions for gay sex. Ron was the only, and I see Barbara Hall's here, she represented so many people in those raids, but he was the only surviving victim of the bathhouse raids who was willing to speak out publicly about, can you imagine that there were still people who didn't want to talk about it after all those years. But he was willing to speak out publicly about the indignity and the injustice of his conviction of being found in a body house. Now, Justin Trudeau's first effort at expungement of unjust convictions was pretty good, but not good enough for Ron. Ron pushed for more, and he got it. When Justice Gloria Epstein was called upon, she's with us here, bless you, was called upon to investigate missing persons and police relations with marginalized communities in the wake of the MacArthur murders, she sought help from wise community leaders. Naturally, she sought out Ron as one of her gay advisors. She trusted him, and people in our community trusted him. Back in the Cold War era, our federal government started a policy to hunt out, identify, and expel LGBT persons from the federal civil service. As a supposed threat to national security, we now call it the LGBT purge. As a result of the class action that I was involved in, the LGBT Purge Fund was created, which is building a national monument in Ottawa, honoring our community's struggle for justice. I'm honored to be a director of that fund, and I'm joined here today by our chair, Maxime Leroy, and our executive director, Michelle Douglas. Ron was a valued member of the fund's Monument Advisory Committee. In fact, the last time I saw, we're all talking about this tonight, the last time I saw Ron. The last time I saw Ron was at a Zoom meeting of that group. I have very fond memories of spending a day with Ron, touring the Holocaust Memorial and scouting sites for the monument, which will be called the Thunderhead. The Thunderhead will be a tangible part of Ron's lasting legacy to Canada, with sod turning its forecast for May of this year. Although I'm focusing on Ron's rainbow activism, I would be remiss if I did not mention, as a director of the Canadian AIDS Society, that CAS has decided to create, with Brian's kind permission, an annual award in honor of Ron. It will be another lasting reminder of his invaluable work. Ron knew that being male and white gave him unearned privilege in our society. However, as a Jew and as a gay man, Ron understood discrimination. He was all about inclusion. He was not the type of gay activist to tolerate misogyny, racism, or transphobia. Ron was a caring and inspiring leader in our Rainbow Tribe. He always stressed hope and the possibility of making things better. Ron had the knack of being able to occasionally disagree passionately with friends, even friends like me, about strategy and tactics, and yet never strain the bonds of friendship. He preferred persuading to denouncing. While he may have preferred carrots to sticks, though, Ron was always prepared to use sticks when needed. I never heard anyone say an unkind thing about Ron. And let's face it, folks, that's pretty rare in activism. Everybody liked and admired him. His wise counsel was in high demand. Like Louise, I called on him for advice and help often, and he was always generous and thoughtful. Ron was the essential gay activist. His death is a great loss to many of us, and indeed to our entire country. But Ron would want us to focus not on his death, but on his life. A life that made all of our lives better. His life and activism made our country a better place in more ways than we can ever know. May his memory always be for a blessing. It will be for me. Thank you.
Richard Elliott and Ron were colleagues in joint HIV advocacy for many years, including most recently as a member of the board of directors of the HIV Legal Network for 6 years, including serving as chair of the board for the last 4. Richard will speak to Ron's work on HIV legal and advocacy issues.
Thanks. So many other gay Elliot who sometimes gets confused with the one who just spoke. I've been asked to speak, and I'm honored to speak on behalf of the HIV Legal Network and the HIV and AIDS Legal Clinic of Ontario about some of the legal advocacy efforts that Ron has been involved in. And I decided that I should wear this shirt today precisely because I wanted to embody the activist spirit of Ron on one of the key issues that he was involved in. As you've heard, Ron was on the board of directors of the Legal Network for 6 years during my tenure there, and chair of our board for the last 4 of those years. In fact, my term there and Ron's term on the board more or less coincided when they came to an end. And throughout that time, I was always extraordinarily appreciative of his thoughtfulness and his unstinting support for me as a director of an organization. Those of you who have been in that kind of position understand the value of having the support of your board and of your board chair in particular, and I was grateful to have had it. But beyond that, it was just always a treat to get together with Ron to talk not just about the work, but also to get caught up on other aspects of what was going on in our lives. So Ron was actually a friend, not just a colleague. And Brian, I can actually remember a number of occasions on which, before I met you in person, I can remember Ron with that little twinkle in his eye and a sort of mischievous smile, talking about how he'd been developing this relationship with this sexy, funny, loving man. And I always took a sense of joy from those conversations when he described what was developing for him. It was wonderful. Now, I've been thinking a lot lately, given the state of the world, about the universal experiences of loss and grief. And precisely because those experiences are universal, so much has been said and written about them for millennia, so it's actually hard to come up with something that isn't trite to say about those subjects. So I'm not going to try to do that, but I want to highlight a few specific things that Ron was involved in from our perspective, working on legal advocacy issues. You've heard mention made a few moments ago about the law reform effort regarding the expungement of historically unjust convictions of gay men. And you've heard mention of the fact that in his advocacy on those issues, he drew as one of very few who was willing to speak publicly about it, on his own personal experience of those raids and of having been charged as a founded. He shared that experience, which is not an easy thing to do, in the media, in front of a parliamentary committee, including while wearing the hat as the chair of the board of the Legal Network. And that was fitting because Ron called me before he went in front of the parliamentary committee to speak about these things. And as you would expect, he used that occasion and others to highlight the need, not just the issue of the historic injustice of criminalizing gay men, but to actually push for a broader decriminalization agenda, which I think reflects what several of the other speakers have already mentioned. He used that occasion to highlight the need for law reform, to get rid of other aspects of the criminal law that have been and are still being unjustly used to police and punish people's sexuality, including sex work laws and HIV criminalization, areas in which the Legal Network has been active for many years. Ron made the connections between the struggle against homophobic criminalization and the criminalization of other populations. Now, speaking of HIV criminalization, it was one of the things that really mattered to him, and he spoke about it regularly. And he spoke about it, and this is so important, as a person openly living with HIV, including in the media, sometimes as the chair of our board, sometimes just as an individual person. It's always been important for us to try to ensure that the voices of people living with HIV, especially those who have faced or fear possible criminalization, have been part of that advocacy. It's also been challenging, for all of the reasons that you might imagine, to find many who are willing to do that publicly. And so I always felt the gratitude to Ron for having been among those who were prepared to speak out on such a difficult issue that provokes a lot of hostility, much of it rooted in misinformation, fear, and stigma. Which brings me to the third point that I wanted to mention, and that is the still deep-rooted stigma surrounding HIV, surrounding sex and sexuality and drugs, which both contributes to and is reinforced by the law in too many instances. And that's why Ron's support of the work of legal advocacy by the Legal Network was complemented by his own personal and long-running work to challenge HIV stigma, including, for example, his participation numerous times in the Smash Stigma campaign undertaken by Casey House. In the final message that Ron and I penned together on behalf of the Legal Network a number of years ago now, in our annual report, we highlighted how the lessee, and in particular the central importance of protecting and promoting human rights in order to respond effectively to a public health challenge that often travels along the social fault lines of inequality, was also so relevant for responding to COVID, a lesson, unfortunately, that has been ignored so often, yet again. But again, Ron was making those connections. There were lessons to be learned. So I want to end with a quote that actually Ryan from the HIV and AIDS Legal Clinic from Ontario suggested to me would be appropriate. A quote from the Jewish sage, Rabbi Hillel. He said, "If I am not for myself, who is for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I?" I think that underscores something that was so fundamental to Ron, the importance of service to community, of making those connections between community, as we've heard mentioned over and over again. So it seemed an apt and hopefully not trite observation to end with. Well, I was privileged to know him, to work with him, to be his friend, and I'll miss him. Thank you.
John Maxwell is the Executive Director of the AIDS Committee of Toronto. He first met Ron when Ron was on the Board of Directors of ACT in the 1990s, and John was working as a frontline staff person. Ron remained connected to ACT and its work beyond his tenure on the ACT board. John?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege and an honor to be here. And as you've already heard, Ron leaves a long legacy of HIV and 2S LGBTQ advocacy, not only locally, but nationally and internationally. I first met Ron when I was a baby gay, and I was a frontline staff member at ACT in the early 1990s, when he served on ACT's board and as board chair. Not only was Ron a mentor and an inspiration to many of us living with HIV, but he was someone who firmly believed that actions speak louder than words. And to that end, Ron's fundraising and philanthropic work, not only for ACT, but for other organizations and causes, was extremely important. In addition to supporting ACT events like Fashion Cares, becoming a monthly donor to ACT, on his 50th birthday, he reached out to friends and to those that he was connected to who had the resources as a way to raise funds for an ongoing fund to be named the Ron Rosenes Health Promotion Fund. The funds, given to ACT and held at the Toronto Foundation, would then provide an annual stipend to ensure that the work of ACT could continue. That's the kind of person Ron was. You know, you've heard from others leading up to the International AIDS Conference that was held in Toronto, how Ron would never take no as an answer. And he certainly did that when it came to philanthropic support for HIV and other related causes. Ron was also always one of the top, if not the top fundraiser at the annual AIDS Walk. And he and I used to joke about, you know, how much more is he going to raise this year in the AIDS Walk? And he would always say it wasn't so much about being number one, it was about ensuring that the resources were there for the community. And there was a time a number of years ago when a meeting was held at the OHTN. It was a 3-day meeting, and it was focusing on how can we really do better in getting HIV under control in communities more affected by HIV. In this particular case, we were focusing on gay, bi, and queer men. And we're hearing about initiatives coming out of places like San Francisco in the US, and London. And it was really an opportunity for us to do things differently in Toronto. And so when we started to talk about maybe we can have a clinic like that here in Toronto, Ron once again opened up his house, called on his connections, brought potential donors in to hear about the work being done at the Strut Clinic in San Francisco, or 56 Dean Street Clinic in London, where rather than having to go through hoops to be able to get tested, you could go in, get tested, get your results back in a short period of time. If you were positive, you got connected to treatment. If you were negative and you were eligible for PrEP, you got that. But it didn't just look at the sexual health of gay, bi, queer men. It acknowledged that to be healthy as people, we need to have good mental health. We need to have strong communities and strong connections. From that meeting at Ron's house, work really started to begin in creating what is now called HQ Toronto. And when the organizations working on that, working to help create HQ, decided that ACT should be the fundraiser to help raise funds to make this happen, Ron did not hesitate to tell us that I want the funds that have been sitting in the Toronto Foundation in the Ron Rosenes Health Promotion Fund to be directed towards HQ. And he did that, and that's part of his legacy. I was also very fortunate to have a chance to see and speak with Ron literally a week before he passed at the 25th anniversary event for Realize. And in his usual fashion, and this is how he always greeted me, I rushed over to say, "Hello, Ron, how are you?" And he responded with his usual phrase, "Better now that you are here." In fact, Ron, the world is a better place because you were here. Thank you for all you've done.
I'd now like to invite Forty to come back to provide us with their second number. Eugene Knapp is a long-standing friend and mentee of Ron's, who will say a few words now. Thank you.
everyone. Thank you. I'm incredibly grateful, humbled, and honored to be able to offer a few words about Ron, to celebrate his life and legacy. Someone who is considered to be one of the pioneers in the HIV and 2S LGBTQ movement. I know my words can really capture the magnitude of his impact, but I'll try my best. Ron was my dear friend and mentor, as do many of us who are here today. I met Ron about a decade ago. As I was getting more involved in the HIV community. As a young gay man, newly diagnosed with HIV, adapting to the new reality of living with HIV, and navigating this social, emotional, and spiritual complexity of living with HIV was quite challenging for me. My deepening relationship and friendship and his mentorship became a source of strength and inspiration that helped me find an opportunity to develop a vision for myself and start discovering what it means to thrive with HIV. Ron was always so generous with his time, love, kindness, and wisdom. I know his tireless activism, unshakable integrity, and forward-thinking mentorship touched the hearts and souls of many of us in the community and meaningfully impacted the lives and inspired many of us to better care for ourselves and for the community. Ron, thank you for sharing the fire within you, within your heart, and the light within your soul with me and with the community. I know you're not physically with us anymore, but your fire and light, and as well as your pioneering and caring spirit, live within many of us as your legacy. Memories of you as the humble warrior and a caring and loving friend, your words of wisdom, will continue to live on to inspire us to advocate for and support those who are marginalized in the communities and serve as a reminder to live and enjoy all the moments of life with integrity and strong values.
So now we want to provide those here in person who would like to share any memories of Ron to stand and speak. As you can tell by the many different areas he was involved in and the many different lives he's touched, you know, it was a challenge to try and focus into the program that we saw today. So we did want to provide people who are in attendance to stand and share any memories of Ron if they would like. We have a microphone that will come just to be able to get the sound so that people who are watching this via live stream can hear your words. So no pressure, but I would invite anyone who would like to stand and say a few words.
Wow, what great memories. I'm left with, I don't even know where to start. I remember Ron and Louise Binder when I met them first when I came to Canada to the 2006 conference that we're talking about. And I was so inspired, and Ron was asking me so many questions about Zimbabwe. And from there, our relationship built into so many circles. I would meet sometimes with John and also with other colleagues, and I'll call them dinosaurs. You are dinosaurs in the HIV field. Can you leave us with some knowledge, with something to do before you die? And I still remember even when I came to their house when he was sick during COVID. And I think you must have been surprised to say, hey, this black woman wants to come during COVID to my house. But I still really wanted to see him because I had heard he was not feeling well. I asked him, can I bring 3 masks? Or how should I go? I said, I don't care, I can talk behind the door. But my culture, you are well when you're not well. And thank you so much, Brian, for opening the door for me. I think I spent the whole day. And I think he was so tired he couldn't speak anymore, but I kept talking and talking, and I'm glad we had that opportunity. But also moving from the ASO field to go to the farmer, for me was something that I was really scared about, because I don't know about boundaries, I don't know about conflict of interest. Those are things that I struggle with. So every time when I would have something that is really struggling, even when it comes to Jipa Mipa, Ron was one of those people that I would call upon. And he would ask me, what does your gust tell you to do? And you always reminded me, Marvelous, you always told me when I first met you about values. What are your values telling you to do? So for me, that leaves me a lot of lessons to learn, and I hope that doesn't just go with Ron. There's so many other mentors, so many other dinosaurs that I'm seeing. So the dinosaurs can also mentor us as we go. And I still remember when International Community for Women Living with HIV was going through struggles. I would just talk to Vaughn out of the blues. I said, can you come and mentor our board on how to be good board members? And he came to the US and we met with Vaughn, and one thing he reminded us, he said, remember, being on a board is not a support group. You have to know that you are there for a certain reason. And with that said, thank you so much, Brian, and all the community that has shown us and linked us with Ron. And Ron, wherever you are, I hope your spirit, and I know your spirit is watching, and thank you for not just going and supporting gay white men. You are also reminding us in circles where people living with disabilities, black people, indigenous people who were missing on the tables. You were always there to bring those folks on the tables. With that said, I say thank you, and thank you for organizing.
I share a bond with Ron that I think will illustrate just how important he was to everyone. I'm Greg Robinson, and we had many opportunities to work together throughout his career, and I dearly miss him at this point. But there's one time when Ron, with one of those lovely calls that we all made to him, he came to my distress. James Krepker and myself had reached a wall with the surgeons at UHN around transplantation and HIV. And we were fighting and back and forth. And it looked like the nut was ready to crack, but I had already cracked. And I phoned Ron and I said, can you please help me? Can you please pick this up? And the story ended, and we got just exactly what we wanted. We actually got transplantation for people living with HIV. Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janet Butler-McPhee, and I have the good fortune of being one of the two co-executive directors at the HIV Legal Network alongside Sandra Kahan-Chu, who's unfortunately sick today and not with us, but with us in spirit. Ron hired us for this job, and he was the board chair when we came on 2.5 years ago. And what I wanted to say about Ron is, we had both worked at the Legal Network for a really long time, and with Ron in various capacities before we took on this role. And he always believed in us. And he, when Eugene was speaking about mentorship, he really had a generosity of spirit and of advice and of wisdom and of friendliness and of kindness that I think is, I can't actually believe he could be the kind of person he was to so many of us. But I think on behalf of Sandra and I would just like to say that people like Ron, their legacy lives on in all of us. And as trite as that might sound, Richard, my wonderful colleague Richard, I think it's so true.
I'm Max Beck. I met Ron back in 1991, I think it was, when I was running Ontario Place, and a group came to speak to me, and they had a group, an activity called From All Walks of Life, and they wanted to make it bigger and make it raise more money and create a lot more awareness. And that was the time when there was a lot of fear still about AIDS and a lot of misunderstanding in the community. So I took on the challenge, and I worked with Ron and a couple of other people that are in this room, and we were successful. We made it a bigger event. We raised more money. We had $1 million on it, and I think it created a lot more awareness. But the real point of the thing I want to say is, for me, there's sort of an accidental memorial for Ron, and it's right here behind us in the park. Because when I look back in those days, I was astounded, because from the first year to the second year, when we tried to reconvene this committee, about a quarter of the people had died. Things were really that bad at that point. And if you go to the memorial, and I come here every year to the service, if you look to 91, 92, matter of fact, if you look to the years before, there's hardly any names in the memorial, because it was sort of more hidden. People died of pneumonia or something else. But if you look to 91, 92, 93, there are 3 or 4 pillars there with names on for the people that died those years. If you go to the other end and look today, there's 1 pillar with about 4 years on it. And that is a testament to the work that Ron, lots of other people did too, but it's a testament to Ron and his work that the incidence of death from HIV and AIDS is down dramatically. Thank you.
Don't call me because I'm not a Jewish person, I'm a last Catholic kid. But there was a saying, remember, and I'm going to cry because I cry everywhere now, it's just a thing I do. There is a Jewish saying that is, if you have saved one life, you saved the entire world. And everyone in this room knows that stigma kills, and silence kills, and fear kills. And so I can't count high enough to imagine how many people Ron saved. But we're all here because we have money. Thank you.
Would like to share anything about their work with Ron or something?
Hi, my name is Leah Stevenson. I will be very brief. I just want to acknowledge one other pioneering area that Ron led in and that we shared. So I had the great pleasure of working with the Canadian Treatment Action Council and with the dynamic duo and many other amazing board and council members who are in the room here, but the dynamic duo of the co-chairs, Louise and Ron, aka the Bickersons. To the earlier comment about you could disagree on strategy and tactics and never strain the bonds of friendship, but mentored by both. And but I just wanted to acknowledge how he pioneered the fight for access to complementary therapies as well, and how important his yoga practice was. It's something we both shared and loved. We both served on the Natural Health Products Advisory Board federally, because we both used and supported people we loved and believed in the importance of complementary therapies alongside of allopathic treatments. And so in the very long list of amazing things and contributions that Ron has made to the world. That is another pioneering innovation that I wanted to acknowledge. And I'm just very, very glad to be here with everybody, remembering Ron together. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Maluba. I met Ron about 8 years ago. I was a young activist just joining the field, and I had disclosed my status. And the first time I met Ron, he grabbed me and hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. And I stared at him and like, do I know you? Like, why are you so friendly? And ever since then, I've had a great friendship with Ron. And just last year at the CAR conference, we spent a lot of time together, and I told him I'm turning 30, you know, I'm leaving the sector, I'm frustrated. And he said, yeah, we're all retiring, we all do that. And he asked me to join a committee, and I said, I don't know. And he said, well, you're the Beyonce of the HIV field, you have to join. And I told Ron, like, you're so chipper, you're so resilient at this, you're so good at this activist thing, I feel frustrated, I feel like I'm going insane. And he said, honey, you're not the last of us. And he said, it's okay to go insane, just come back. Just come back. And, I think that just really details the activism and the fight that he had. And Ron's, one of his many wishes was for access to medication federally. And so he had so many missions, so many more jobs to do. And I'll always remember that. And he's such a great mentor.
So if there's no one else who's going to put their hand up to speak, we're very thrilled that Brian Goodman, Ron's partner, is here. Brian, if you can concluding remarks.
Ron Rosenes. He was a lovely human being, true gentleman, a statesman, and my handsome, loving partner. Yes, he was definitely a dedicated advocate, activist for people living with and affected by HIV, and in so many different ways. And for over 30 years, actually, right to his passing days. And Ronnie, I just want you to know, this is not another awards night. Yes, a lot of your peers are here, your pals, and I've got to tell you, they are extraordinary people. You are extraordinary people, you're beautiful souls, you're lovely. Thank you very much for being here with you. You know, Ronnie, the people that are here, they loved you. They looked up to you. They respected you. They were mentored by you. And they're here because they miss your bad jokes. But I want to just say a really big lot of thank yous, and the big thank you is to all of you who shared those stories of your experiences with Ron. Thank you. Big heartfelt thank you to, how do I even thank you, to OHTN, Rodney Court, Gene Bacon, for all of you done to honor Ronnie. It's been very respectful and also very insightful. Thank you. And big hugs to that planning team. Wow, John McCullough, thank you. Darian Taylor, Doug Elliott, Rodney Court again, right by Rodney, Ryan Peck, Rick Kennedy, Lauren Fox, and Louise Binder. I would like Ron just to be remembered as the guy who wasn't shy about talking of his own personal journey with HIV and queer issues, the barriers, and his accomplishments. But he also spoke up for others whose journey was just beginning or breaking down. Ron truly lived a full life, an amazing life. And throughout his life, he did not display hate or exclude anyone. So one thing I wish, and I think it's been on the table for like over 30 years, something that Maluba just referred to, and that would be no out-of-pocket expenses for anti-HIV drugs, and that includes PrEP, and that's for everyone. I really hope that can happen. And in closing, I just want to say to Ronnie, and this is just a little cute little thing we said to him when back in the beautiful sunny fall day, and it's nice that it's sunny out today too. He was going off into another journey. And it's just to say to Ronnie, as long as the sun shines, the wind blows, as long as it rains or snows, Ronnie, you'll be in our hearts forever. Thank you.
Thanks. So I just want to close quickly by thanking everyone who participated, who contributed, who shared their stories, their photos, their recollections of Ron in a variety of fields. He leaves an extraordinary legacy. For those attending in person, we invite you to stay. We're here until 6 o'clock. There are refreshments available, so we encourage you to mix, to mingle, to share your stories of Ron with each other. I want to thank everyone, the planning committee again, the OHTN and its staff, for putting together this event, and I wish you all good health and happiness in the year to come. Thank you.